Hi, this is Carl Leopson at the University of Arizona, and we've talked about Tiers 1 and 2 in school-wide positive behavior supports. Now we're going to talk about Tier 3, which in positive behavior supports is largely about individualized behavioral interventions for kids. And we'll talk about the history. We'll talk about function-based intervention and what function is. We'll talk about the process of function-based intervention, and then exactly how you go about implementing that process in a school system. Let's start with history. So the history of function-based intervention generally starts with Skinner and some other luminaries in the field, moves through applied behavior analysis, clinic-based intervention, application of function-based intervention in the law, and then moves into schools. If you've never read any Skinner, a great place to start is with his book called Science and Human Behavior, particularly the first 3 chapters. I've posted them for you at our course site. You'll find it surprisingly readable. If you've only been told about Skinner or been told horrible things about him, you should read the first 3 chapters. I think you may see that he takes a really interesting spin on the notion of how we can develop a science of human behavior. And really, much of what he talked about in this book is about how we might predict human behavior. And he talks a great deal about not about cause and effect, but about function and how behavior functions, and functional analyses and functional relationships. And that's largely where this notion of function moves into the field of applied behavior analysis. Now, in behavior analysis, groups split off into people doing simply experimental work, theoretical work, and applied in behavior analysis in labs with rats to test out new theories in behavior analysis, and folks who were doing applied behavior analysis or moving the usage of behavioral principles toward social issues and social problems and applying them to social issues in science. So that's where we end up with the term applied behavior analysis. But even though it was applied, most of the application of behavior analysis or applied behavior analysis occurred in clinic-based settings. Had a lot to do, as Skinner originally designed, with observing human behavior. So in clinics where they would bring in children or adults to be observed, experimenters would sit behind one-way mirrors and set up situations that were like situations in the field, or analogs. So you may sometimes hear about analog assessments, and that's what that refers to. It refers to setting up situations in clinics that are analogous or similar to situations in the field. But then along in 1997 came the requirement in IDEA to use functional assessments and positive behavioral interventions and supports in schools. And some of this is language directly out of the reauthorization of IDEA in 1997. And you can see that the term functional behavioral assessment is used actually a few times in the law. There is never a description in the law of what it means and how it is to be done. So that's actually the point at which I was finishing up my doctoral degree, and much of the work that I began to do with Mike Nelson, Terry Scott, and other folks at the National Center on Positive Behavioral Interventions in Sports had to do with defining what a functional behavioral assessment would look like and what the process should be like and what the elements were that people should carry out. This actually necessitated a movement from clinic to school. Okay, so the application of applied behavior analysis, functional interventions in school-based settings instead of clinic-based settings. So it was largely the law and the reauthorization of IDEA in 1997 that moved us into the application of function-based interventions in schools. So that's in a really quick rundown, and one that leaves out a lot of history. But that is a short explanation of where function-based intervention comes from, how it moved to clinics, then through the law moved into school settings, and ended up as the tertiary or the third level in positive behavioral interventions and supports.